Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've just totally devalued education in many of our communities, in many of our families, if we are just honest and we look at it. I think about my grandparents, sharecroppers in Marshall County, Mississippi. My grandfather had a 6th grade education, my grandmother 3rd grade. Raised 12 children. All of those 12 children went to college on some level.
Wow.
And it wasn't that they were told, you must go to college. It was instilled in them to value education. And along their journey, they attended college. Some of them became professionals, etc. And as I look at families, even my own personal family, extension of my family now, I don't know if we value education to the degree that we did, even 20 to 30 years ago.
And you're right. There's not a lot of evidence that those going to college in the last few years has really shot up. There's not a lot of evidence for that. About 20% of people in the United States have a college degree. But here's what's really fascinating, and I share this with my students all the time. And this is a motivation, this is something I use for motivation with them. Only about 1% of people in the entire world have a college degree. And I tell my students that, you know, we are in Inglewood and, you know, you may not, you know, be at Harvard, but if you finish here and go down the street to UIC or Chicago State or somewhere else, you put yourself in the top 1% of educated people in the world and the top 20% of educated people in the United States. And that's pretty impressive, and it's not that far off, and I don't think that we tell our folks that enough. You know, it's important. It's special, and we, you know, like you said, we need to feel that value and that worth. It pushes education that way. So, yeah. So okay, so let's think about this. Okay, let's talk about, let's say the because I'm a political science teacher, so I gotta always talk about politics in some way. About 50% of people in America vote, and I always joke with my students that a lot of people who do vote, they go into the polls and they take their ballot and they do this little game where that person sounds like they're a woman, so I'll vote for her, or that person I saw a commercial, so I'll vote for them, and my grandmother told me to vote for that person, so I'll vote for them. What role does education have in fixing this broken democracy that I would say? And because we have a broken democracy, I would argue that, you know, in many ways we've lost a lot of freedoms because we basically have just squandered them. How does education fix that? How can it fix it? How is it fixing it? What do you guys think about that question?
You know, I will say this. I think that this increase, it all goes back to the pedagogy. Are we teaching for a test, or are we teaching for empowerment and transformation? And that is why it is so imperative and at Promise neighborhoods that we teach for empowerment and transformation. Because when you teach for...
You say at Promise neighborhoods?
Yes.
Instead of at risk?
Yeah.
That's wonderful. We had a guest that said that a couple weeks ago. I think it was at Hope.
Yeah.
So I think you guys got me now. I'm going to start using those terms all the time.
Please.
Yes.
So that empowerment and transformation in those areas will impact this world so much more, because when just think about the civil rights movement. At the fore, we think of our leaders. We think of Malcolm or we think of Martin, but we don't think about the teenagers. We don't think about the college students. We don't think about the women on the front lines of
really the core of that.
Exactly, of this movement. And so when we begin to think in terms of empowerment and transformation and making this democracy the right way, that is so far from just filling in a bubble. I'm not saying that foundational skills aren't necessary, because they are very necessary, but that in terms of that pedagogy of drawing you into why does this look like this? And what responsibility do you have in transforming it yourself?
That's dangerous.
It is dangerous, and that's why they're taking tests.
Yeah, you know, Hitler said it best when he said how fortunate it is for leaders when men don't think.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And you know, you start telling people, hey, you know, you could change your situation, you can change your reality, and education is about that. Now you got people trying to overthrow governments and topple over leadership and that sort of thing.
But maybe not overthrow or topple over, because I will still put ours against anyone's. Our democracy, our representative democracy against anyone's, and say that I still want it, but I want it to work better.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, and I fully agree with you, because you know, I agree with you on that. But just look at how in particular communities, and this is actually not just for urban communities, this is for all communities. Look at the way that people who are in public offices, they stay in those offices forever. And the incumbents have a 90% reelection rate in the United States. And when you start telling people, hey, you know what, this is the difference between this person's policy on this and this person, people start to think, then they start to do, and they start to do things different. And what I would say is that it starts to change what we're used to. And I honestly think that, without being a conspiracy theorist, that the people who are in power in many ways in our culture and society, it doesn't benefit them for these, young people to have all this critical, thinking and that kind of stuff, because they start to change their culture and their communities.
Well, absolutely. Well, that's why this last presidential election, it taught us a number of stories or a number of lessons. And not just a lesson that we have our first African-American president, but also the way that basic social media was used with average people to change politics or the potential that could be used. So, I agree. I think that if young people in particular in our schools, that we really taught and make them understand that not only do they have the obligation to change, they have the power. Most of what I have experienced is that most people don't believe they have the personal power.
That's true.
To make the change. And that is what we're dealing with. So if we can have enough small victories with local elections, establishing local policy, people can then experience that victory and believe that, hey, well, you know what? We can make a difference.
You're absolutely
right.
But
until we do that, we will be caught kind of in this political world where incumbents can protect their career jobs. And it's only natural that if I'm in a cushy position, 6 to 8 years, it's only natural that I try to protect that. But is that in the best interest of growth and development for the entire community?
Absolutely,
No.
absolutely. What I want to see as well, and City Colleges actually does this, which I'm actually very proud of. I want to see us teaching people to be entrepreneurs too, and to move outside of the box, and because that is, and I don't know whether you can teach. You can obviously teach a certain level, but some people innately have that drive, and others don't. But that is what changes communities. People step up and they start enterprises and they hire people. And I just don't think that education always leads us to that direction.
Well, it's about ownership of the community, but the school has to be the center of the community in order to do that.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases here in Chicago, we have very unstable communities because where's the Lighthouse neighborhood school? What happened to it? Where is it? And if we look at the shifting demographics of most major cities, Chicago in particular, we've lost 200,000 people. So where did they go? Did they leave when the projects went down? Where are they?
Very important.
And so what happens to those communities and what happens to the owners of those communities? Now, some people may judge Cabrini Greens to be a place of discontent and crime and all that ills the world, but that was someone's home. That was someone's community, and they owned that community and they were there. So it meant something and it means something. So that's when you have enterprise, is when you have ownership of the community, when you feel your worth in that community. And I think that when we do have a neighborhood school and everyone can feed into it, I'm not taking my kid across town, or I'm not testing to get in this school on the other side of the city, or taking them to the suburbs. When I have a school where my child can walk to because it's fully resourced and we're participating in the education of our children, we are fully invested at that point.
And I agree with you. I will have to say, however, back to our original conversation, until we get to that place, because I think we can, but until we do, I want to give parents, kids, as much option and as many choices as possible.
But they
because
do
I agree.
have the option.
I don't agree with that, though.
I do think they have the option.
They don't have it if they're not financially, if they don't have it financially.
They have the option because they vote. They have the option because they pay taxes. They have the option because they can go to the State House, or they can go to City Hall, or they can go to school board and they can make demands. We we discount our power.
I agree.
You know, as citizens in the city, as citizens of the world, we discount our power. Look at Egypt. If we look at colonists, I tell the kids all the time, you have these 13 colonies that did not have a right to say, no, we ain't paying you.
Yeah.
You know, we're not paying you taxes. That wasn't their right. But they had enough gumption, maybe enough arrogance about themselves to make that demand. And I think that those are the underpinnings of our country, is that we are empowered because we are American.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. You know, but you know, on that question of school choice and that sort of thing, you know, people who do pay taxes and send their kids to private schools, they don't get that tax money back. They fund the public education system, and then they pay again for additional education. And in Europe, they actually provide vouchers for parents to go to
But that's the
different kinds of school.
responsibility. We are still responsible. We want.
Oh, we are, absolutely.
We are responsible for, and I have a lot of nerve saying this because my son is 2, and in a few short years I'll be in this conundrum.
Probably in a private school somewhere.
Well, I don't know. I don't know that. I want to be the type of American that, because my son is going to have to live in the world with everyone, not just the ones who went to private school, but the ones from the neighborhood as well. So I think it's to our benefit to impress upon the people who we put into power, the money that I spend every time I look at my check or when I go to the store, that this has to work for all of us.
Well, see, and Stacey,
I'm sorry to start this fight again.
No,
you know?
no, this is wonderful discussion.
Hey, that's my job.
I'm learning a lot. The only thing that I would add to Stacey's comment is that just as she has said she will determine what's right for her, I think all parents need that same opportunity. So even if we just carve out the school choice issue, I think it really boils down to what really parents want. And I don't know if in this whole debate about the traditional and the charter and contract, private, I don't really think that we have really gotten to what parents want. They need to be empowered to determine what's best for them. And I would believe that when it all boils down, that they would want something that would resemble opportunities for a full spectrum of the kind of school.
And we didn't mention this, but after all of the research and all the money we spend and all the textbooks and computers and everything else that we do, that parental involvement is still the #1 factor to influence whether kids are successful or not. And we can't discount that. And as we talk about our communities, we cannot negate the family. We cannot negate how we ought to work to strengthen those institutions, because as the neighborhood school should be a beacon of light, so should the family. And one of the major crises that we face is that we haven't done that also. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
And hopefully we will get to a solution soon. When we attempt to measure something as abstract as student success, there is no easy answer. There's no clear-cut formula that appeases all parties. We should take such challenges to heart and involve ourselves in the democratic process. School board meetings occur every month, so take time to speak and to listen. I'm Ted Williams, and thank you for watching The Professors.